Great, well welcome. My name is Josh Wyner. I'm with the Aspen Institute. I run our College Excellence Program. And we're here today to talk about college costs and value. The title of the session is Who Can Afford College and Who Should? So Secretary Duncan, how many people were able to listen to the Secretary? So most folks. You know that the federal government has announced that they're going to have a college rating system. And for the first time in 2015, and we may talk a little bit about the advisability of that, the availability of data, but really this is a response to a couple of different things. One is the rising amount of student debt, and we'll talk about that. The average student debt is about $30,000 among graduates. That's compared to about $20,000, what, about a decade ago? Is that about right? And so people are asking, well, what is the value of a college education? Is it too expensive? The other part of the equation is, I think for the first time, the federal government and some leading foundations, Lumina, Gates, some others, are starting to question college graduation rates. On the whole, the entire sector, across all of the sector, 50 to 60% of all students who enter college, the best estimate is graduate. So we have a dropout rate of probably 40% plus. There are some people who would like to talk about that being higher based on transfer rates. One of the big problems is we don't really know the answer. We don't collect data on all of the students in the country. That's a separate question. But what you have is a balance here. What you've got are relatively low graduation rates, and you've got increasing costs. And so Americans are asking, is college worth it? And we're seeing more and more folks question that. I think in the aggregate, the answer is pretty clear that having a college degree in the main, on average, is well worth it. That, in fact, the premium for a college education is greater on average than ever before. So the increased earnings and the decreased unemployment rate is greater. But there's real differentiation. It's not clear. You know, it's by subject matter. It's by that you study. It's by the college you attend. And so here with us to explore this question of the value of a college education and help us unpack some of what appears in the press are four friends and great experts. Sandy Baum is a professor at George Washington University and a senior fellow at the Aspen Institute and one of the leading analysts of student financial aid. Tony Carnevale, actually I'll move to David Leonhardt, is with the New York Times, a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter, and he now is the managing editor of a website and column called The Upshot, where he's covering higher education issues and trying to focus on data and think about the connection between data and public issues. Next to David is Tony Carnevale, who directs the Georgetown Center on Education and the Economy, where he's really one of the leading analysts of the intersection between the labor market and higher education. And last but not least, certainly, Mike McPherson, president of the Spencer Foundation and former president of Macalester College. So I'd like to start with Sandy. As I mentioned, there's been this proliferation of articles in the past several years that college costs are out of control. And I think for many people who send their kids to college, they're experiencing this real struggle as middle-class wages have stagnated and college costs continue to go up and prices continue to go up. People are concerned whether college is worth it. Tell us a little bit about your work, and is this a big problem that we're facing nationally?
Well, I mean, it is certainly true that students and families are bearing more of the cost of education than they were a decade ago. What that means is that when you go to college, the price that you're paying may seem like a lot, but actually almost everyone is being subsidized to some extent. In other words, if you go to a state college or university, the taxpayers are paying part of the bill, and the amount the institution is spending is much more than you're actually paying, even if you're not getting financial aid. At private colleges, that subsidy tends to come either from the endowment or from annual giving, but very few people, there are some exceptions, are really paying the whole cost of their education. And if you want to know why prices have gone up so much in recent years, there are a number of explanations, but a very, very big one is that states are simply not funding the institutions as generously as they were before. So really, after adjusting for inflation, the per student funding is about 25% less than it was a decade ago. So that means not that the colleges are spending more, it's not a cost problem so much as how are the costs being covered, and students and families are bearing more of the price. When you ask, is this a general rule? What does this mean? How should people think about it? it's so complicated. Really, part of the problem is that it's so complicated. There are lots of different colleges and universities. I mean, talking about going to college and graduating from college, most of the college degrees that are awarded are not bachelor's degrees. They're either associate degrees or undergraduate certificates. So most people who are going to college are not going off, and probably most people in this room, when you went to college or when your kids went to college, you went off to a place where somebody lived in a dormitory and got a bachelor's degree. That's not what most people are doing. So there's a lot of variation in what it means to go to college, and some of these colleges are very inexpensive. On average, you can go to a community college full-time for a year for something over $3,000. You could also go to a very expensive college. You can go to Harvard, and it will cost you about $60,000. But if you don't have the money to pay, it will be cheaper to go there than to the community college. So it's a very complicated scene. People are not paying as much more as the headlines would have you believe. And the problems we face really have to be dissected so that we don't just say college, so that we talk about people in different circumstances, young people, adults. We talk about different kinds of degrees, different things that people are going at, and different kinds of institutions, many of which are great, some of which are not great at all.
When we were just, Secretary Duncan was just speaking, and actually, David, you had asked him a question about whether the president is engaged in education issues, how much and on what issues. And one of the things he said is that he gets more letters than just about any other issue on college costs and on how unaffordable it is. So how do we square that? I mean, if Sandy, and we can turn to you as well, David, but how do we square this idea that, that college costs aren't necessarily going up, but prices maybe, but only for a subsector, with what appears in the press and what Secretary Duncan says the president's getting more letters about than anything else, that the price is getting out of control? Well, why are we seeing that?
Well, I mean, one reason, and I will let David talk, is that the economy is so bad and people's incomes are down. They've lost a lot of their savings. They had planned ahead, and now those plans haven't really come to fruition. Many people are unemployed. They have new jobs where they have lower incomes than they did before, and so they're struggling to pay for lots of things. And here's this big ticket item that you've been kind of, managing, sort of making ends meet, and then suddenly you have to pay for college. Not that you didn't know your kid was going to turn 18 and you couldn't have planned, but in the current economy, it's much harder for people. And the people who don't get a lot of financial aid and who are paying those prices and want their kids to go to expensive colleges are vocal.
I agree with that completely. And I think I worry, college costs are a problem, right? They're a problem for the reason that Sandy said, which is governments are cutting back on how much they are supporting colleges, and thus the amount that people have to pay to go to public schools has gone up. They're also a problem because I think there are ways in which the higher education market is dysfunctional and there's not enough competition that would bring prices down. So I don't want to suggest it's not a problem, but I think it's an exaggerated problem. And what I worry about is that when you have journalists, to be institutionally self-critical in the largest sense of institution, when you have think tanks, when you have experts out there wringing our hands over whether college is worth it. And then we go home and we say to our kids, you are going to college and you are graduating. We don't wring our hands in our own house. We don't wring our hands with our own kids. We wring our hands in public and send a message to other people, hey, you know what, maybe college isn't worth it for your kid. And then we go home and we say to our kid, you're going to college. And I worry about that difference, because I think the research is overwhelming that college is worth it. I think that most kids are not, there are very few kids who are paying $50,000 a year for college, and the ones who are coming from very high income families. And so while I do think college costs are a problem, I think the research is overwhelming that college is more worth it than it ever has been before. It is worth it not only for most average kids, but for most marginal kids. We can talk about some of that research. I'm sure you all know it better than I do. And so I think it's really tricky. How do we talk about college costs being a real problem? How do we talk about the fact that our society is underinvesting in education? And yet, how do we grapple with the fact that there are a lot of settings in which we are sending a message that I think is actively damaging to people on the edge of whether to go to college or not. I've actually quoted Mike on this in the Times Magazine. Ask a college skeptic, ask one of these people who's publicly skeptical of college whether they're sending their own kid to college.
So let's move to the issue of value. So there's a cost and there's a benefit, and it's clear that on the averages, in the main, if you look at the averages, that going to college is worth the investment, remains worth the investment. But Tony, you've looked a little more deeply into that and looked at the value of different kinds of degrees by subject, by school. Say a little bit more about your work, what you found on the benefit side.
Well, the problem is, yes, college is worth it, and that's the problem. It's very much worth it. There's a lot of infighting among economists and others about this and that study. For the most part, data carefully done shows it's worth it. There are differences in value. Better to be an engineer than a humanities major, not just in the short term, but over your lifetime. The yes, 25, if you're in the 75th percentile of the people who got humanities degrees, you'll make more than the median earnings for an engineer over a lifetime. But on average, there are huge differences in value within the college labor market. There's not much doubt about that, I don't think. The real problem is college has become so much worth it that everybody's got to have it. In some ways, we shouldn't call it college, because that brings to mind an image that no longer is the reality, as Sandy is saying. And that is, everybody needs some kind of post-secondary education or training, or they're going to be in trouble. Apart from the only thing more expensive than going to college is not going to college in the long term. So there is a reality here. The difficulty is what we require in the American economy, and now in every modern economy, is a mass post-secondary education system. And what we got are a lot of mom and pop shops that are duplicative of each other at levels that a business person would find very difficult to understand. The efficiency is very, very low. We don't unbundle the cost of college. That is, college is essentially something that's offered as a brand. The picture of the university door. It is for the most part, colleges compete on reputational value. A decent market, and now that college is worth it, market standards will be applied, and colleges will be asked to meet the standards of a mass democratic institution, which is to say they have to be accessible as much as possible for everybody. So that in the end, if you look at college, just to do it in gross terms, there's socialization that goes on, growing up, drinking, safe sex, all of that stuff. There is a second kind of value, which is learning for its own sake, which has nothing to do with economic returns. And in a republic, it is probably the most important kind of learning. It's the sort of learning that hopefully will help you to live more fully in your time as a citizen, and even more importantly, as a person. And then the third kind of value now, given the change in the economy that requires college for a middle-class lifestyle, is career value. In the end, until we separate those values, price them differently, and then make the big set of decisions, which are somewhere in the future, hopefully past my own time, because I wouldn't want to be around when people try to make this set of decisions, but ultimately we're going to have to decide what the government will pay for. Are we going to pay for socialization? Are we going to pay for learning for its own sake? Are we going to pay for career development? What are the priorities among those, and how much are we willing to put down? Should I subsidize your child, who's going to go to a college and live there expensively, while my child doesn't have sufficient funds to live at home and go to school? Those are some of the hard questions that are coming up down the road, precisely because college is worth it. So in my own sense of this is that is ultimately what we're dealing with. The short-term issues about the value of college and what should be supported, I think truthfully, we're at the very front end of all of that.
So given that we're at a moment where those things remain bundled together by and large, learning and the labor market outcomes certainly, and for students who go to residential college, that's bundled in, the socialization. So Mike, in light of that, we've got a group of folks who are trying to make decisions today for their students or as adults about whether to go to college. How much is it reasonable to borrow for a college education? How much did somebody borrow? Is 30,000, 40, 50? What's the right number?
Let me say, I'd like to say a couple things about value first,
Yes.
and then come into that. I actually think it's a mistake to think that you can separate learning for its own sake from learning for jobs. In fact, it seems to me that the fundamental truth is that deep learning, which lasts a lifetime, has the biggest payoff. That because it has a payoff in terms of your personal life, your life as a citizen, and clearly in a world where jobs only last 5 or 10 years before new jobs get invented, your ability to adapt to changing circumstances. If we start thinking, I want the best job for my kid 5 years after she graduates, we're making a huge mistake. I want the best career, the best set of careers for my kid. And that's a very different calculus, I think. The other thing I want to say about value is everybody cares about earning a good living, right? And the great philosopher Alfred North Whitehead said, when classics was the road to advancement, men studied classics. So, no argument with that. But if the main thing that makes kids go to college is that college is what Les Thoreau called a defensive necessity, that's a horrible atmosphere for learning anything. I'm going to college to prevent having a disastrous life. That's not like, wow, let me get at those books now, right? I mean, so I hope we can find ways to send a positive message about the ways people will have better lives because of college.
Is that I'm curious, is that your sense of how students are experiencing college today?
I think it's hugely varied. Certainly I taught at Williams College, for people who have the chance to go to places like that, they recognize that in all kinds of ways, it's going to be one of the best experiences of their lives. For people who are trying to get to a community college and their car breaks down and they don't have $300 to get it fixed and they're taking 2 buses and a train and they don't have classmates whom they get to know or relate to, I suspect it's not the same kind of expansive experience. And there are realities to that, but there are ways of making it better too.
So and I want to get back to the question of borrowing, but
Sure.
but what percentage of students, who knows, are actually on residential campuses today, are living as full-time students in college? I mean, how many people are experiencing that? Do you have a sense?
It's certainly less than half.
Yeah.
It's probably about the top 500 four-year colleges are about 1/3 of enrollment. Top 568. So there are a few more that are open admission.
But I've heard it's somewhere around 1/4 because some of those students are somewhere. So I think I think you're pointing out that this is there's a different college experience for a lot of students.
Right.
I think if we look at mass higher education, as Tony is saying, it's more it looks more like the commuter who is fitting that around a job.
That's right. That's right.
As well as taking care of parents or kids.
And there are many adults going to college or going to post-secondary education. The fact is that for adults who have not experienced college by the time they're 25, almost none of them will get bachelor's degrees. And that's partly because that's not what they're there for. Because at that point, they know where they are in their careers. They need more training. And that's a big part of the market. It's a part that lacks good advice for students in a very serious way.
And some might say that the system of higher education wasn't designed for those folks. That in fact, even in some of our vocational training programs, that we're modeled after the residential model, where you have a bunch of course choices, where you have classes in the middle of the day, and I think that there's a struggle to modify that.
The financial aid system wasn't designed
there are
for
some problems with this, and that is that the experience we're talking about is highly segregated and increasingly segregated by race, class, and ethnicity.
For sure.
If you look at the new college goers since 1994, 84% of the white kids went to one of the top 400 four-year residential colleges. 75% of the black and brown kids went to two-year open admission two-year schools or open admission four-year schools. And it matters because the differences in spending per student in those 3 categories are huge. If you go to one of the top schools, it's 2 to 5 times as much The other issue I have with the humanities model, or the idea that liberal learning is necessary in combination with more applied learning, is we're way past that. Almost all graduate education now is in specific fields by definition. It's occupational.
Graduate education.
Graduate education.
Right.
Undergraduate education is about 18% STEM, science, technology, and engineering and mathematics. It's 25% business. It's almost 10% education. So you very quickly get to a four-year college system that is essentially occupational. If you throw in psychology, which usually leads to counseling when it works. Very low-paid job, but that's what it leads to. We've already made this transition, and we've given 4 years of school plus graduate school to affluent white kids and the rest to everybody else. The only other point I want to make about this, and this is something that is that to some extent, I think there's a presumption in elite higher education in America, and in Europe certainly, and it's a very European way of looking at things. Our system is essentially German, as I understand it. So in the end, what we're saying is that it is somehow morally superior and ennobling to go to school and study literature and write a novel. And that is somehow superior to go to school and learn how to build a bridge.
Tony, let's not confuse what people major in with the entirety of their undergraduate experience. Very few people get bachelor's degrees without any exposure to things like history and so on. So to reduce everything to majors, I think, I certainly agree. I mean, I think most of the people that I taught at Williams were thinking, I'm pre-something, right? So absolutely, people want careers. People will have more successful careers over their lives if they have opportunities to open up their minds, to think better, to respond to experiences of people who are very different from themselves, who come from other cultures, and to be able to solve problems whose shape we don't even know at this point. So I think narrowing too much to, I'm going to be this, I'm going to be that, and forgetting about everything else is not a path to long-run success. So we have to have a balanced view.
But the difference is that whiter, more affluent kids in America get 4 years of college and then oftentimes graduate school, 4 years to become an engineer and get a BA in engineering. You can do it in 2.5 or 3. And that's not available to the kid who goes to the community college and gets an AA in engineering or a certificate in engineering. So the opportunity for learning is hugely different, even in the same subject matters. I'm not quarreling that there isn't value in general learning. I'm just not clear that all general learning comes from general subject matters, whether they're requirements that go along with 4-year degrees and so on and so forth. As a nation, we have always been people who focus on doing things, doing work on the world. Retirement into academic lifestyle and removing yourself from the world is certainly an option. But for the most part, I think we want our children to be people who do work on the world.
So, but I mean, I think one of the problems, I mean, all of us are deeply committed to increasing opportunities for people to be able to make choices among all the different kinds of education and the different life opportunities that are available. And it's not just about college sorting people. I mean, we sort people from the very beginning. If you look at the neighborhoods that people grow up in, if you look at the elementary and secondary schools that they go to, if you look at what their parents' lives are like. So it's not at all surprising that colleges sort people. We have to, we need to do something about this. I mean, and I think that probably everyone here certainly is committed to that. The question is, do we then, you know, how do we deal with that? Do we limit the opportunities because everybody can't have them? These are really hard questions. I mean, some people would argue that no one should go to an expensive elite private college where, you know, you have amazing opportunities, because it's really not fair that some people have those better opportunities than others. It's not really clear that we're going to solve the problems by, I mean, first of all, we're not going to eliminate that. What are you going to do? I mean, it's, you know, I mean, I sent my kids to colleges like that because that was an option, and whatever my ideology is. But I think when we talk about it, this whole conversation about college, and this gets back to what we were saying at the beginning, is a very difficult one because of the need to differentiate about the needs and the goals of people and the financial resources that they have. So when we talk about student debt, I mean, the reality is when we say how much should students borrow, well, a third of bachelor's degree recipients don't borrow to go to college. Their parents are paying for them to go to college. And then other people borrow very large amounts of money. If you look at the distribution of student debt, you know, everybody who's borrowed $100,000 for college has been on the front page of your newspaper or another newspaper. Very few people borrow that much. Who borrows a lot of money? A lot of adults who go back to school, not because of the tuition, but because they have to live while they're in school. And so older students tend to borrow more than others. People who go to some of the for-profit schools borrow much more than people who go to public institutions. Now, they tend to be lower income. They tend to be Black and Hispanic, and they tend not to have the information to make good choices. So if you're going to go and study engineering at an elite four-year institution and you borrow $60,000 and get a bachelor's degree, great. But if you're borrowing $60,000 to go get a certificate in medical technology from Corinthian colleges, which is about to go out to business, you've got a problem.
So I want to actually turn back to the question of cost, because I think we've come to a conversation about the relative value of different models of education. We've talked a little bit about informing students, I think, Sandy, in your remarks, and David, you've talked a little bit about this, about whether students can get better information about choices that they make. But aren't college costs, in fact, too high? And whether the issue is that they've increased too much. But if we're going to get to a mass model, 75% of all students go to public colleges. And it looks like the state contributions for higher education have come down, and it's hard to imagine that they're coming back, given the crowding out of other expenditures from entitlement programs that we're seeing out into the future. So I want to get to this question of college costs. One critique of higher education is that you go into a typical large college and you have 1,000 courses on 150 programs of study. And do we really, even in your model, Mike, where you want people to explore different things, do we really need 25 different kinds of medieval literature? I mean, I think there's a question as to whether there's something that colleges can do. And the one other piece that I'd like people to think a little bit about is technology. Is there an opportunity to bring costs down on the technology side? But is there something that institutions should be doing to hold the costs of college down?
I think costs are too high. I mentioned this briefly before. Costs are too high for two reasons. One, I think they're too high because as a society we underinvest in education. I mean, I think a first principle question here is what should our goal be, right? And I would argue our goal should be every single American kid should have substantially more than 13 years of education. Right? I don't know whether it's 15 or 17, but we decided at some point in the middle of the 20th century that it should be 13. We didn't actually get there for everybody, but we decided, we didn't sit around having debates about, wow, is high school for everyone, or are we wasting our resources by sending a lot of kids to high school? We decided high school is for everyone. The economy has gotten vastly more sophisticated and complex since then, right? The same way 13 years made more sense in the middle 20th century than it did in the 17th century. There's no reason why 13 years is the amount of education we should hope that every American kid has forever. That should naturally rise over time. And yet, as a society, we're underinvesting in education. We're spending too much money on wasteful healthcare. And part of that is because the people who get a lot of wasteful healthcare vote at higher rates than the people going to college do. Part of that is because healthcare is this issue that is, it's perfectly designed to have waste in it, right? Because whenever there's an attempt to rationalize healthcare or cut healthcare costs, we all worry that it's going to kill us, right? And so it's very difficult to cut spending in healthcare. We spend massive and growing amounts of money on prisons. We have cut taxes in many ways, and we have essentially overinvested in some areas, healthcare above all, and underinvested in education. And I think the other way is, I really do think that it's hard to say to colleges, voluntarily control your costs. I think as taxpayers and as government policymakers, we have not held colleges sufficiently accountable for their inefficiency, for the value, and for the cost. And I think if we can see a little bit of movement toward that, which we're seeing in a bipartisan basis, we had a Democrat, Arnie Duncan, talking about it. Mitch Daniels has talked a lot about it in Indiana, in which we say to colleges, hey, we don't just give you this money for putting the kid in a seat. we're going to give you money depending on how well you teach the kid, that can start to have an effect on costs as well.
I agree with that. I also agree that costs should be lower than they are. And I think questions about the role of technology in reducing those costs are really important. One of the things that hangs us up, besides all the good reasons, good in the sense of believable reasons why colleges have a hard time being efficient, but even apart from that, we don't understand at all well what are the things that are actually happening within those college classrooms and dormitories and other settings that are effective in producing learning, whether in the old technologies or in the new technologies. We are really surprisingly ignorant about the actual instructional processes and learning processes of college. And one of the reasons for that is when we have public discussion about, it amazes me, about higher education, we spend almost all the time on who gets in, what does it cost, what happens after you get out, and how do you pay for it. But nobody is ever talking about what's actually happening inside of that thing, right? And so Larry Summers yesterday cautioned that when we think about it, it'd be so much cheaper if it were online. He pointed out that this would be so much cheaper too if it were online, right? You wouldn't have to pay $3,000, you could pay like $3,000. Right?
Mike, wait, we can't talk about that. Right? I think this panel's done.
But I don't think you're wasting your money. My point is that the experience, the human experience, is a very important part of the learning that happens. And we want to be very thoughtful about not leaping to an untested model where it might be a decade before we realize we have really wrecked a generation of students. So I do think this needs to move, but it needs to move with evidence and not with wishful thinking.
So is it reasonable to assess the value of a college education or part of it by what happens after graduation? Does that tell us something about the learning that's occurring?
Yes.
I would think so. What else would you look at?
Let's include income, which is deeply important, but let's not limit it to income, right? Let's look at things like health. Let's look at things like, do people who go to college live longer than similar people who don't? Are they more likely to have successful relationships? Can we measure their life satisfaction? The initial evidence suggests that college has benefits, education has benefits well beyond income, but we need more research to know that for sure.
But all of which correlates with income. That is, when we say college makes you more healthy, well, Shakespeare doesn't cure cancer. So how do you, in the end, what it is class. That is, college is indicative of class. And people in higher income classes have better eating habits, don't smoke. We all know the stereotypes here. The high school dropout kid who smokes and gets in trouble and has a kid out of wedlock. It's not, I think college is a proxy here.
You're too good social scientists not to recognize that there have been studies that control for people's economic status and their wealth and their college education, and that there is a net effect from college education. You're very sophisticated about this stuff, Tony. You can't just reduce this to class.
But at the margin, the key variable in a capitalist economy, don't mean to sound like a communist, the key variable in a capitalist economy is how much money you make. That's what it comes down to.
Of course, the money is terrifically important, but there is considerable evidence that, for example, in healthcare, like when health economists study this, they find that there's something different in the way people who have been to college follow the directions of their physicians. And I mean, whether you exercise or not, and things that don't cost money, that there do seem to be behavioral changes. We don't quite know why, and there surely is great variation. It's not like you go into sit in a college classroom for a few hours and you come out, transformed. We need to figure that out. But if we don't believe, if it is really only about money and class, which of course has a lot to do with who your parents were, then we're really wasting a lot on sending everybody to college, because we could find a cheaper way to do this. And we have to figure this out. We don't know, and I don't think we've asked those questions.
To me, one of the most important things is the biggest gap seemed to be among lower income and truly middle income, not what the phrase is often used in public debate, that's where you see the huge gaps, that the lower income kids who do manage to go to college and graduate do so much better than even similar lower income kids who did quite well in high school and who don't get through, and the gaps are just vast. And that actually makes sense to me, because not only are you learning things in college, learning actual things, and I don't want to separate college and high school. Not only are you learning things in school, but you are also setting yourself a goal. You're saying, I have enrolled in high school and I'm going to try to finish. I have enrolled in college and I'm going to try to finish. And having that experience of success, of learning how to do something, is an enormously important experience to further success in life, whether it's marriage, whether it's a job, whether it's parenthood.
And yet we still see dramatic differences in college-going rates, college completion rates, degree attainment rates, and where one goes to college by income.
Yep.
If you come from a family from the top quartile, your chances of going to college, Tony, you talked about this a little earlier, are 4, 5, 6 times higher, and of getting a degree than if you come from the bottom quartile. So I want to turn to solutions. What are we going to do about this? Because this is not a new trend. In fact, as we've expanded college access, stratification has increased. On some level, that makes sense if you're bringing more people into higher education. And there's a limited number of highly selective colleges and college slots. We're going to create mass higher education at a less expensive rate. So on the other hand, if it is true that low to moderate income students may see the greatest gains by going to college, what are we going to do about it?
One big thing I think that we have to recognize is that there's a certain set of things we can do in the near term. But we should remember that there is also a long term. And I think it is really clear to me that if we made early education, preschool education, widely available and made sure it was good quality, and then if we followed that with improved effectiveness in elementary and secondary education, we would be looking at a much, much more manageable problem 20 years from now. And if we keep setting all of our goals and deadlines 5 years away and say, forget about everybody who is not a high school student because it's too late for them, we're only going to focus on these people right now, we're going to keep doing what in business is called a lot of rework. Where we're graduating people from high school with very limited capability to succeed in college. And then we're working really, really hard, as we should, to find ways to help them. But we're also creating the problems in the first place with the inequalities of opportunity and the low quality of the experiences students have earlier.
But that goes back to the same point. In the end, God help us if K-12 ever starts working. Because if K-12 starts working, and we have huge masses of young Americans who are prepared to go to college, at the current productivity of American colleges, we simply can't afford them. So in the end, if you look at Obama's goal, the president's goal, he wants to get back to our first place standing in the world on college attainment, last in 1992, I think we were there. Not that long ago, at least by my numbers. He wants to get back there. Even a loose estimate of what that would cost, just to do that, is about $200 billion more than we're spending now. Given the shift from investment in young people, which we're doing as a nation, because we're retiring old people, and we're going to be doing that for quite some time, there is an immediacy to this question that we don't have. If we're willing to sacrifice several generations, which we're doing, of younger people.
We have two hands, Tony. We can work on two problems at once. We can work on the 30-year problem and the 10-year problem at the same time. And if we do succeed in getting good results from elementary and secondary education, we're going to be so rich in this country that we can pay for doing these other things. It would be such a boost to economic productivity.
So to be clear, the shorter term problem is, we also know from social science that if you take similar students and put them in different colleges, you see different results. And so in addition to thinking about what's happening earlier on, there's a need for us to improve the efficacy of our higher education system. I want to turn it, I think we've got about 20 minutes left. I want to turn it to the audience, and this has been a lively conversation, and I hear a little bit, let's go to that side. And if you'd wait for the mic, please, I know this is being recorded. Thank you.
Hi. Okay. So just as a preface, I started out at a 4-year private liberal arts college in the States. Promptly after a year of realizing how much of a ripoff it was, I went and got graduate degrees and an undergrad degree at McGill University in Canada for 1/10 of the cost. So that's sort of where I'm coming from. My question is, and I want to point out and see how responses are generated with regards to the irony, the apparent irony that financial loans that are required for most to facilitate these enriching educational opportunities that you talk about, which really, as you say, they're meant to ultimately increase earning potential, freedom, social mobility. It's clear that post-educational experience, the crippling loan obligations and the massive debts, they immensely decrease the student's ability and desire to exercise those skills of creativity, critical thinking, the innovation, the implementation of the skills, and the empowerment that's gleaned in college, not to mention the unmotivating psychological effects of carrying large burdens of debt. So I just want to point out that there's it's for me an incredibly ironic landscape that you say these are opportunities for enrichment, for empowerment, they're worth it, no doubt, undoubtedly. But when you graduate from a program like that and you've cultivated all these skills and the empowerment to do these things, the transition between that experience and ultimately putting those into practice, especially in your labor market, it's not very realistic.
So, if any comments, happy. Otherwise, we can field another
I'm
question.
happy. I just wrote about this, and I've already made plenty of enemies on this issue. So I graduated with inflation adjusted with about $25,000 in college loans, which is no longer quite the average, but it's pretty close to the average. The average is somewhere between 25 and 30. Is that right? And I think, so it's important to remember that that is a very normal amount of debt that people in this country graduate with, right? That the stories you hear of $75,000 of debt, of $100,000 of debt, are deeply, deeply unusual. Graduating with $75,000 or $100,000 in debt is bad. It is crippling. It's also highly unusual. And we should be working to prevent cases like that. But the norm, graduating with $20,000, graduating with $30,000 in debt, is not crippling. It is, if you look at the gap between what college graduates make and what everyone else makes, it is vastly better to have $30,000 in debt and a college degree than neither. $30,000 in debt is about what you would go into debt if you bought an SUV and didn't put any money down. And so again, as I talked about before, I do think college costs are too high. But I also think the main problem we face in our society are not the majority of people who graduate from college with typical amounts of debt. It is, they tend to be, as Larry Summers said yesterday, pretty well off. We should be worrying less about them, even if they tend to be the children of journalists. We should be worrying less about them than we should be worrying about the kid who doesn't go to college because he had a really bad K-12 education, who goes to college and gets $10,000 in debt and doesn't get a degree because she went to a bad college. Those are the kids that I'm much more worried about than, quite frankly, the kids like me who have to spend a decade repaying their college loans.
Or who goes to college and spends a lot of time getting a degree that only offers a minimum wage job. And there are those as well. So I think that's the other side of the equation, which is how much debt compared to what the returns are. And there are some bad deals. When you hear about people taking $100,000 worth of debt to get a degree, I don't want to pick a particular subject matter, I might offend some people here.
Let me warn
you,
don't.
Where they're going to need a graduate degree to actualize the career that they need, and they don't have any money left and no wherewithal. I think that's really troubling as well. So I think it's the combination of how much debt and what the possible value is.
I also think your point about McGill is a great point. Canada is doing a much better job of investing in education than we in the United States are.
Sorry, your term normal, normal is a relative term, and $20,000 of debt at McGill is huge, and the educational experience is phenomenal.
Yeah, no, Canada's doing a much better job of investing in education than we are.
To the woman in black here. Yes.
I feel there's something inherently missing here. I work on a national level with literacy and reading. 63% of students going to college are reading below grade level. The programs that are offered at junior colleges and colleges to help these students is very below what I would call quality. And you even see students who are from better K-12 educational institutions who don't know how to take notes, don't know how to write an essay. And in the colleges, they're so involved with the curriculum of the degree that I think that there needs to be a better remedial piece to help these students so they will graduate and they really will have a better college experience.
So if I could just actually comment on that, if that's okay. We do a lot of work with community colleges. I think the good news is that community colleges now there is pressure to have higher graduation rates. And when they start to look at the data, they discover exactly what you've said, which is that students who start behind college ready, and this should not be a surprise, are the least likely to succeed. What they also realize is that they are offering them a developmental education, a remedial education sequence that looks a lot like the high school sequence. For many of these students, that didn't work. So why do we think that offering the same thing is going to work? I think that actually this is one of the promising areas in community colleges and throughout education. The estimates are about 60% of students who enter community college need remedial education, and about 25% of those in four-year colleges. I think those are probably the best estimates. And what colleges are doing to revamp that, to modularize, to use computer-assisted education, but also to realize that study skills are important and study habits are important, I think is encouraging, and it's the place where we probably see the greatest reform. So I think the colleges are coming to the same conclusion you have. Whether they act quickly enough is an interesting question, and there are a lot of different theories. One is that we should just do away with remedial education and just get students into credit-bearing classes and tutor them along the way. Others believe we need to accelerate. Others believe we can modularize and use technology. But there's a lot of activity on this front. So I think you're right, it's a huge issue. Any college that has a low graduation rate will look and identify that. And as we change the accountability systems and the expectations of college that graduation rates will go up, this is almost always where they first go.
And there is some good software that's actually been very helpful in this arena.
To the gentleman directly in front here, in front of you.
Thank you. What scares me is the lesson from Andrew McAfee and the second machine age, which was, he was here during the first session. And what I took away from that book and his prior book was that the value of education, college education, is increasingly going to diminish, except for a very, very small number of people, because technology, robots are going to replace so much of the work that people are going to college to, with the hope of supporting themselves. Now, what that suggests to me is that we're going to have to find other ways for people to self-actualize, to feel good about themselves, to develop self-esteem, which suggests that, you know, the objective should increasingly be about learning for learning's sake and for socialization, rather than necessarily the economics of how am I going to learn a living. Because if McAfee is right, there's going to be very, very few people who are going to have a decent standard of living because they've earned it.
So is McAfee right? Is the long-term?
There are two usual responses to that particular book and others, and that is, the first one is hurrah, which is that if we get so much productivity from technology that none of us have to work anymore, unless we want to, and we'll have to fight over opportunities to do it, or find other things to do, then humanity has reached a new stage of development. We can make all our projects going to Mars or whatever it is we want to do. The frightening thing with that, for most people, I think, you get a reaction to that they're scared of it. And the reason is because suddenly human beings won't be busy at work. What will they do? They'll have to turn and face themselves. And that is the most terrifying thing that one can think of. If work won't preoccupy you, what will? But in the end, it's a very good news story. People keep making his story doom and gloom, and it really isn't. It's nirvana. So, but the second response, if human beings can handle it, the second response is that this book is written over and over again. It's been written over and over again since the 1700s. And you know, this goes back to the Physiocrats and Malthus and on and on.
The Luddites.
The Luddites, on and on and on. And it's never proven true yet. And the book This book always appears in the middle of recessions. And I've read them all and been terrified every time I've read them. But in the end, the evidence suggests that if we're going to, that kind of productivity from robots or technology, if that occurs, it's a wondrous thing. It's more likely that the productivity that results it increases wealth so much, we'll have to then figure out how we're going to share the wealth. Think about that for a moment. And then that will create demands for new services, which has really been going on in what is essentially a service economy now since the 70s, really, but more notably since the 80s. So one reaction to that book is, mine is, I hope that happens. It scares me personally. I don't know what I'd do if I didn't work all the time. The second thing is, if it does, I think it's unlikely. I think there's great wealth to be had in technology. The opposing argument, by the way, is an argument that says we're heading into a series of headwinds in our economy by another very notable and brilliant economist who is saying that growth will slow appreciably in the United States. And the difficulty that we're going to have is very slow growth, joblessness, and all the ugliness that comes with that. So somebody's wrong, and usually in that case, the answer, in my experience, the answer is somewhere in the middle. And I'm hoping, the hope is the technology, not the slow growth.
The gentleman here. Wait for the mic if you would, please. Thank you. And then we'll come over here.
Just sort of in response to the question about Canadian education, isn't the real difference that we've made a different decision in this country, that in this country we've decided that those who go to college should be responsible for paying for college, whereas in more socialized economies, the community as a whole pays for it. And isn't that the root cause of the problem you're really discussing here?
That's the Canadians calling.
Isn't that really what the effect is, that has then pushed these costs onto children, and then they've had to get loans and so on and so forth?
It's exactly right that that's a very fundamental question. How much of it does society pay for and how much do the individuals pay for? But too often this conversation, I think, is a sort of yes or no. People sometimes say, oh, we used to think it was a public good and now we think it's a private good. It's obviously a combination. There are definitely social benefits to all of us when more people go to college and get a good education. There are also very powerful benefits to individuals. And actually, Larry Summers said this yesterday too. It's interesting. You know, if we made it free, so let's assume tuition were free for everybody, then what you would have is all of the taxpayers, whether or not they went to college and regardless of their incomes, subsidizing those people who, one, start out ahead of the game because people from affluent families are more likely to go to college, and two, end up way ahead of the game because if you go to college, you're going to end up, chances are, with a higher income than others. So we should be subsidizing people, but they should be paying for part of it themselves, and we can have a big debate about how far we move along that continuum and if we've moved too far towards having people pay on their own. And it's also really important to understand that part of what when the states have pulled back and tuition has gone up, the federal government has actually stepped up and provided more financial aid than they used to. We're spending a lot of money on Pell Grants for low and moderate income students, and there are tax credits that have increased dramatically for middle and upper middle income families, actually. So it's a question that we can debate and debate how much. It does seem like we've moved too far in the direction of making students pay on their own. But where we should be is another question.
There's another fundamental difference here, though, which is that in many other countries, in most European countries, higher education is centralized. We don't have, here we have, depending on how you count, between 4,000 and 7,000 pretty independent institutions of higher education. And the way we choose to subsidize them, there are some direct subsidies, but by and large, on the student learning side, putting research aside, is through vouchers for students to go to the colleges, and then the students make the choice. So when we're trying to influence colleges to improve productivity, to improve graduation rates, to align to labor markets, we tend to go to the solution that the president has, which is to have a rating system to get better consumer information out there. There isn't evidence yet that's going to significantly move the needle in terms of people making better choices. So I do think that you point out an important difference. And part of it is about the relative amount that's paid, but it's also the manner in which the money flows to institutions is different in the United States
I
than
think
some other
the best
places.
hope for the rating system is not that parents and kids use it, much as I wish they would. I think it's that colleges care a lot about it. I mean, I'm taken back. I spent a lot of time writing about healthcare before education, and so I'm often noticing differences and similarities. And I remember talking to a doctor at UCSF named Bob Wachter, who said to me, I know that people in San Francisco aren't going around looking at which hospital has a better door-to-balloon time for heart attack patients. But I can tell you the fact that they now publish this meant that we at UCSF went from patting ourselves on the back and saying, well, we're UCSF, of course we're great at this, to being confronted with evidence that we weren't so great at it and we had to get better. And my guess is if graduation rates and things like that become more salient, it could have an effect even if it didn't have a big effect on consumers.
Mike?
And it's
Well,
also a base, oh, excuse me. Go ahead.
Yeah. The measures have to be pretty good. They don't by any means have to be perfect, but they have to be pretty good before you get the effects you want. If, for example, you say you really want to be proud of having a high graduation rate, just take all of these people that you're worried about, right? The people who need remedial education, who it's hard to get them through, don't let them in, right? This is, in the early days of rating hospitals, turned out that the best way to have a good score on people surviving heart attacks was don't admit people who have severe heart attacks, right? So you have to be careful.
But you don't think that's a reason to give up, right? It's just we got to get better measures, but we still got to do it.
We got to get better measures, and you have to have enough patience to have some confidence in the measures before you
But one of the measures needs to be that, because you're exactly right, because this is already happening, it's been happening for 15 years, is to the extent you get pressure to have higher graduation rates, whatever it is the performance outcome is, the easiest way to, especially as your budget is declining in an institution, the easiest way to solve that problem is to get better students. And that means students who are whiter and more affluent, to put a point on it. So, and that's also occurring in community colleges now. So that we know, so when Arnie Duncan says, when Secretary Duncan says, and he said it every time, we want outcome standards, but one of them is the share of Pell Grant students, which is he wants to rate institutions on the extent to which they don't abandon at least the most economically challenged students. And I think in the end, a lot of us think that transparency, it's a big step forward. I agree with, I wonder if it'll change people's decision making.
Let's get to another question here. If we can.
So I know that education and innovation in the same sentence are oxymoron. However, if we're looking at kids need some fundamental early learning, some K-12 and some post-secondary, why don't we lop off a couple of years? There have been proposals before about this, either cut high school or cut college. Do we really need all those years? Is there some way we can compress either the high school, middle school, or college experience, and then you save money, you can get more kids through, and it could be a win-win?
So some have proposed a 3-year college degree. What do you all think? Is 14 years or plus preschool too much?
I think we should go for a 4-year college degree first. It's currently about 5.2 on average. And it would be a significant saving in the cost of college and significant reduction in the burden on families if we arrange things so that people move through more quickly. You know, one production process that nobody is talking about disrupting is the one where it takes 18 years from when you have a baby to when you have an adult. And I think that's a pretty fundamental process, and complementing those growing years with educational efforts seems like a very smart move. So I don't see that you're going to start sending kids to college, sending them away and doing things like that in mass numbers at age 15 or 16.
I do think summers
send them
are
away. Have them do their first year of college as they're now juniors in high school. We're doing that anyway with AP. That is, the system is melting on itself. Even with all the resistance to that, it can't help it. It's melting. And so I mean, there is an irony in here, and the answer, I think, is we don't know. But it's very clear, I don't think most people won't, we need more education, not less. But if we're going to get more at the current effectiveness and productivity rate, that's a problem. So the answer is we need better. Now that's slick, because that presumes we figure out how to do better. And that is an onerous task. And we're not, I think we all agree we're not far along on figuring out how to do that. But we're at a point where we probably ought to make some choices. Most social choices, especially political ones, are made in the absence of information. That is, it becomes a priority. Legislators and public leaders make a decision. The systems out here in the world are then asked to catch up.
David, you had a comment on that?
I just think summers are an interesting possible thing to explore, right? I mean, I think we've now hit our maximum Larry Summer quotations in this panel, but as he mentioned, the history of that is from farming communities, and it doesn't exactly fit our modern world. And there's also research that what happens in summer is that the most vulnerable kids, who Tony is rightly most concerned about, fall further behind.
Certainly right. Sandy, any final words?
Yeah, well, I mean, it really is true that for people in college, I mean, this 5 years to graduate is a huge problem, and it's not just a problem because you have to pay for college. It's an extra year out of the labor force. It's an extra year that you have to be living and working, and we really need to figure out how, and part of that has to do with underfunded institutions that don't offer the courses that students need in order to graduate. And so certainly it's right that we have to figure out how to do this more efficiently and effectively.
We're out of time. Thank you all. Join me in thanking the panel for a lively conversation.